A very warm welcome to the next video in the series, Why on Earth Would We? This one is on the subject of stretching. Now, those who know me will know that this is a subject close to my heart, but what I'm not going to do here is just dive in and say, don't do it for these reasons. That wouldn't be particularly helpful or productive. What I am going to do is present a set of assumptions that we all make, including me, when we choose to stretch. Or we advise our clients to stretch. And I've got 10 of them, and there are a hell of a lot more than 10, but I've got 10 key ones here. And they're assumptions, but they're also questions that I want you to just take a step back and ask yourself these questions when you choose to stretch or ask a client to stretch. Stretching is a clinical intervention. I'll say a little bit more about that down the line in some of the content here. And like any clinical intervention, it needs thorough thought. Okay, so hopefully these 10 questions or 10 assumptions will help you arrive at the right decision for you and your clients. The other thing I was going to say is this is not just about stretching. Everything I'm going to say equally applies to releasing as well, stretching and releasing, although the title just says stretching. Stretching and releasing go together here. Okay. So just bear that in mind from whether you're an exercise, movement or manual or physical therapy professional. It equally applies to whether you're demonstrating or getting somebody to physically stretch, or you are doing a manual therapy technique to release tissues. So everything I'm going to say applies equally to that. The other thing I'm going to say is I'm going to use the words tight and tightness throughout. Those of you who have been on my coaching program or know me well will know that we get rid of all that terminology on the coaching program to replace it with completely new terminology. But for the purposes of this video, I'm going to just use the word tight and tightness because it's simpler. Okay. So down to the assumptions. As I say, there are 10 of them. Assumptions or questions. Look at it either way. Assumption number one, that the de facto answer to muscle tightness is to physically elongate either an entire muscle tissue or elements of it. Now, it seems very straightforward, but that's essentially what we're doing when we stretch, and actually, to a certain extent, when we release as well. A lot of releasing techniques involve elongation of muscle tissue or other tissues. So the de facto answer to muscle tightness here seems to be, in our industry, that we stretch or release. There's no science that backs that up at all and proves that actually it does benefit. Yes, I hear lots of comments, oh yeah, I feel great when I stretch. And yes, it has a short-term effect, sometimes a short-term positive effect. But does it have a long-term effect? And that's the question I would like you to ponder here. Okay, and I'll come back to that right at the end. So assumption number one, that the de facto answer for muscle tightness is to elongate a tissue or parts of a tissue. Okay. And actually, there's no science to back that up, none whatsoever. Assumption number two, that we know that what we're seeing or feeling is actually tightness. Again, those who know me and have been on the coaching program will know that I say and demonstrate cogently that there's no such thing as just tight. So is it actually tightness? All right. Or is it the body just presenting what we think is tightness from a whole set of things going on inside that body? So is it actually tight? Assumption number three is that we know that the feeling and observation of tightness, we know what the feeling and observation of tightness means. It's sort of related to number two, but what does it actually mean? So the first one was, is it tight? Second one is actually, what does that actually mean? Okay, and there's a hell of a lot of science out there that demonstrates what very, very, very clearly what the feeling of tightness actually means. But then that rolls up to say, once we know what it means, does that actually mean that the answer is to physically elongate a tissue or part of a tissue? All right, I'm not going to give you the answers here because that would be unfair and it would mean this video would go on for 3 hours. Okay, but just ponder that question. Assumption number four, that we know why something is tight. The reasons for a tissue presenting as tight are so numerous that I would argue and assert that there's no way we can know why something is tight. And so the corollary to that is, should we actually be focusing on the tissue that is presenting as tight? Or should we be working somewhere completely different in the body? And that brings us on to another one which we talk about a lot on the coaching program, which is the assumption 5 is that we know what type of tightness we're seeing or feeling. Now, there are, as I say, there are multiple reasons for something to be feeling and observing tight, but there are also multiple types of tightness. And we cover those a lot when I'm working with clients. If we don't know what type it is, or we're assuming we know what tight it is, tight is tight is tight, therefore we elongate it. Okay, I will leave the question to you. If you don't know what type of tightness or why it's tight or what is actually tight, I would argue that our clinical reasoning here is not going to be very clear. Okay. Number 6, assumption number 6 is that we know what tissues are tight. Anybody who's worked in a manual therapy context will know, and any body working context will know, we've got layers of muscles on top of each other and they're all intercrossing and all that. How do we know precisely which tissue is presenting as tight right now? There might be multiple ones presenting as tight, but actually they could all be presenting as tight for different reasons. Ouch, that's huge. We've got multiple tissues all feeling tight, but they actually could be feeling tight for multiple reasons. But actually then we're talking about stretching or releasing. How do we know what we should be stretching and releasing? Even if we should be, again, there are certain circumstances where we should be releasing and stretching, but actually, how do we know precisely what tissue we are stretching and releasing and whether the one we're trying to get to is the one we're actually stretching or releasing? I'm going to here just show up a picture, okay, from my mentor, Joe. I'm going to share my screen. Many years ago, Joe was doing some research around the sciatic nerve. And this is something which she showed me many years ago. And it's an image of the piriformis muscle. And it sort of adds into the assumption here that do we actually know precisely which tissues we are physically elongating or releasing? Okay, the grey bit is a cadaver image. The number 1s are piriformis, the number 2s and 3 are elements of the sciatic nerve. Now, nerves are something that should never be stretched. But how do we know when we're stretching piriformis that we aren't actually stretching the sciatic nerve here, or elements of it? 2 and 3 are both elements of the sciatic nerve. So even if we're stretching piriformis, doing a piriformis stretch, which I see loads of times on Facebook and other social media, people say, yeah, I've got tight piriformis, let's stretch it. Actually, how do we know we're not actually stretching the sciatic nerve, something which absolutely should never be stretched? And actually, okay, add in this, the reason piriformis might be feeling tight is because there's something going on with the sciatic nerve, which is making piriformis feel tight. So actually piriformis is distracting us from the real problem. So in this image, we'll say we've got piriformis muscle and we've got elements of the sciatic nerve, the tibial nerve and the common peroneal nerve. Okay, don't worry about the terms. Basically, what you need to understand is that in this particular context of piriformis, okay, nerves run very closely, or actually, as you see in number 3, is actually running through the middle of piriformis. Okay, so if we stretch piriformis or release it, or indeed go in with some tool, or heaven forbid our elbow, what are we actually working on? So it brings us back to the question of what are we stretching? How do we know what we're stretching? More than happy to discuss that one with anybody at any time. So the next one, assumption number 8, is that we know that the tissues we are stretching should actually be stretched. And as I've said, things like nerves and ligaments and other structures really should never be being stretched. They're not designed to be stretched. Just like, as I said in the other video I did on foam rolling, the IT band is not something that can be stretched and therefore shouldn't be being stretched. How do we know that what we're stretching should actually be being stretched? So that's number 8. Number 9 is something very close to my heart and very close to my mentor's heart as well. The assumption 9 is that we know that what is showing up as tight is actually not tight for a very good reason. There's a concept we explore on the coaching program called actor versus reactor. Sometimes a tissue will be tight for a damn good reason, because it's protecting something or stabilizing something that's currently unstable. So how do we know that's, you know, that's the sort of whole business. I'm not going to go into actor reactor too deep, but essentially it's that question. How do we know that what we're feeling and seeing as tight is not tight for a damn good reason, because it's protecting something or stabilizing something because something else is unstable in the body? So something else has to come in, take over and get tight to stabilize something in the body. It could be the spine, it could be the pelvis, it could be SI joint, it could be anything. So that's number 9. And number 10 comes back to some basic stuff here. The assumption that recurrent tightness is just normal. How many of your clients come to see you week in, week out, session in, session out, and what you've been working on is back just as tight as it was before? So we need to know that when something is recurring and becoming tight for, you know, often over and over again, that there's a reason for this, and this needs to be investigated further. So there are the 10 assumptions. I'm not going to paraphrase them all again. You can go back over the video. So can you honestly say, as a professional, exercise, movement, manual therapy, physical therapy professional, can you honestly say, hand on heart, okay, that you know the answers to all of the above questions when you advise somebody to stretch or you stretch yourself? A feeling or an observation of tightness is an indication of a tissue injury. And stretching and releasing are clinical interventions. We need to know the reasons why we're doing it. Okay, there seems to be this disconnect that stretching is not a clinical intervention. It absolutely is. It's not just an exercise intervention. There seems to be this disconnect, as I say, that, oh, it's just tight, stretch it. Maybe, maybe not. Okay. So until we understand a bit more about the particular injury that we're seeing, should we be intervening with something as invasive as stretching and releasing? I'm not going to say yes you should and no you shouldn't. I'm just saying go back over these questions, go back over these assumptions that I'm saying we're making, and they're assumptions that I made all the way through my clinical training and early days in clinic, until I started understanding some of this stuff and started questioning this. Actually, why is that happening? Is it happening for a good reason? Should I be doing this intervention to this tissue right now? Is it the right intervention? Clinical reasoning is important. Okay, and stretching and releasing are clinical interventions. I'm going to leave it there. If you've got any questions at all, pop them underneath the live video, or contact me privately if you'd rather. And if you'd like to know a little bit more about the coaching program, where we go into this in a whole bunch of detail, giving you the answers, giving you how to work it out, and giving you the alternatives to stretching and why that's important. We do all that on the coaching program. So I'm going to leave it there. As I say, pop your questions underneath, and I will see you soon in the next video. I haven't decided what the subject's going to be yet, but I'll try and keep it on the same theme. Why on earth should we? I'll be maybe asking for your input on what that might be. So bye for now, and I hope you found it useful. And maybe next time you ask a client to stretch, or you think about asking a client to stretch, just go back over some of these questions and say, am I absolutely sure this is the right clinical intervention for this particular situation? Bye for now.